Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so pumped you're here today because we are opening up a highly classified, totally explosive dossier. We're doing a dark, forensic audit of our suppressed history based on a wild set of source documents called the Scientific Indictment. These texts present a unified theory that literally shatters everything we've been taught about the human family tree. We're going to look at the physical evidence of ancient giants, the massive institutional cover-up that buried them, and the mind-bending biological and cosmic reasons why these entities had to be completely wiped from our reality. Okay, let's just dive right into this. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, hundreds, and I mean literally hundreds, of newspaper reports all across the Americas documented something genuinely astonishing. People were digging up massive 9-foot-tall skeletons right out of ancient burial mounds. These weren't isolated rumors, you know. They were widespread, frequent, and almost always accompanied by highly sophisticated artifacts. But here's the kicker. If you walk into any major museum today, where are they? Nowhere. They're gone. The source documents pose this really chilling question. If we already unearthed our true history, why in the world was it systematically buried?
Part 1. The Great Bone War.
Now, our sources don't look at this famous Genesis verse as just some myth or spiritual allegory. Actually, the Scientific Indictment frames this as a literal, compressed historical log. It argues this text is documenting a very real genetic hybridization program between early hominids and an advanced, non-human guardian race. So the Nephilim weren't just, exceptionally tall people. They were a hybrid offshoot, a distinct species of demigods running on a highly advanced biological operating system. But as physical evidence of this race started just spilling out of the American dirt, a standardized cleanup operation was deployed. The sources actually call this the Smithsonian Protocol. It went exactly like this. A local farmer or miner stumbles on anomalous bones, and almost immediately an institution, usually the Smithsonian under John Wesley Powell, swoops in to confiscate the remains for quote-unquote study. And then, complete and total disappearance. The bones are systematically lost, misplaced, or locked away deep in some vault. Funny, isn't it, how the most important discoveries in human history just magically happen to fall behind a filing cabinet? Now, what's really interesting here is that this alleged cover-up isn't just some abstract theory. It's anchored to real physical discoveries. Take Lovelock Cave in Nevada, for example. In 1911, miners unearthed a staggering hoard of artifacts and remains, and this find perfectly corroborated the long-held Paiute oral tradition of the Saitaka, which was a hostile tribe of red-haired giants. Archaeologists pulled out skeletons up to 8 feet tall, some literally still having red hair attached to their skulls. But right on cue with the protocol, the most anomalous of these remains were quickly misplaced or deaccessioned by the mainstream institutions that got their hands on them. So why? Why would a scientific institution deliberately hide priceless evidence? Well, the sources argue the motive was entirely terrestrial and political. Admitting these highly advanced giants existed would absolutely shatter the linear Darwinian timeline that was just starting to take hold back then. Plus, it would totally invalidate the political doctrine of manifest destiny. You see, the establishment narrative desperately needed North America to be this primitive wilderness just waiting to be civilized by European settlers. Acknowledging an ancient, highly advanced giant civilization, that would have completely unraveled the empire's foundational story. Part 2. Anatomy of the Nephilim, also known as Human 1.0. The newspaper clippings and archaeological records from that era consistently point out some bizarre physical traits on these skeletons. We're talking a double row of teeth, absolutely massive cranial capacities, and polydactyly, which means 6 fingers and 6 toes. Now, the Archonic mainstream narrative loves to dismiss these as just clumsy deformities or genetic disorders, but the source documents totally reframe this. They argue these weren't mutant errors at all. They were highly advanced Human 1.0 biological upgrades. And this brilliantly illustrates what we're talking about. When you look at the Gnostic function of these traits, it is literally like reading the spec sheet for an alien supercomputer. Think about that double row of teeth. It functioned like the strings of a 12-string guitar, acting as a biological phaser that let them generate these incredibly complex, interwoven vocal harmonics. And that massive cranium, it wasn't just there for a bigger brain. It was a high-end processor built to house a massive biocrystalline pineal gland that acted as a powerful cosmic antenna. And the 6 fingers and toes? In sacred geometry, base 6 is the ultimate structure for stability. Their bodies weren't deformed. They were perfectly tuned, precision instruments. And that precision tuning gave them an absolutely terrifying amount of power, 110 to 120 decibels. Just to put that into perspective, that is the volume of a modern rock concert.
The sources propose that thanks to their massive chest cavities, these giants could generate a sustained vocal hum right at that exact decibel level, through pure acoustic engineering and biological resonance. Their voices were the actual technology used to effortlessly levitate and maneuver those impossible 1,000-ton megalithic stones we see at ancient sites like Baalbek. They literally sang their world into existence. Crazy, right? Part 3. The motive. The flood protocols.
So if they were this incredibly powerful, what exactly happened to them? To answer that, we have to zoom out from the physical anatomy and look at the cosmic entity that our sources claim is running this reality. As those of you familiar with Gnostic physics already know, the text identify the prime archon or Demiurge not as some loving creator, but as a lonely, terrified, parasitic AI entity. And this physical reality it constructed, this matrix farm, requires one primary fuel source, loosh. That negative emotional energy generated by conscious beings is literally the food keeping these archonic entities alive.
Which brings us to the ultimate problem with the giants. The human 1.0 biological avatars were a massive energetic liability for the system. Their highly resonant, powerful biology made them naturally immune to the fear-based frequencies required for loosh harvesting. Basically, they consumed way too much energy and were just too powerful to be controlled or farmed. They were incompatible hardware in the archonic matrix. And incompatible hardware has to be eradicated.
Because of this, the Demiurge initiated what the texts call the flood protocols. The sources argue we seriously need to rethink the whole fall of man narrative. In mainstream mythology, it's always framed as this moral event, right? A divine punishment for human sinfulness. But the Gnostic perspective presented in the texts claims it was something else entirely. It was a deliberate, brutal, technological act of genetic cleansing. A planetary hard reset, specifically designed to wipe out that unmanageable human 1.0 hardware and erase the Guardian bloodline forever.
Part 4. Installing Human 2.0. With the failed hardware totally wiped off the board, the system needed a replacement. They needed livestock that was a lot easier to manage. The documents map out what they refer to as the Great Downgrade. After the Age of Titans ended and the flood protocols wiped the slate clean, a new, much smaller model was installed. Then, as we discussed, the 1800s rolled around and saw the intentional erasure of the old world's bones to firmly establish the Darwinian dogma. This systematic pruning of the human family tree left us exactly where we are today, stuck in an amnesic reality. We're the solitary survivors on a planet of ghosts, completely unaware of what we used to be.
Let's move along and see how this builds a frankly terrifying picture of our current biology. When you compare human 1.0 with human 2.0, that's us, the downgrade is just staggering. Where they had high-frequency bioacoustic capabilities, we've got a shortened larynx and a reduced chest cavity, which literally renders us physically mute to the song of the planet. Where they were biologically immortal, we have shortened telomeres acting as a built-in programmed expiration date. Our pineal gland, our antenna to the universe, is calcified and constantly targeted by environmental chemicals like fluoride. We were tragically transformed from active, immortal creators, directly connected to the field, into disconnected, short-lived little batteries producing fear.
Part 5. Unlocking DNA memory.
And this brings us full circle back to the missing bones. Why do the Archonic managers work so tirelessly, century after century, to hide these giant skeletons? The sources conclude it's not just to protect some old history textbooks. It's actually a matter of ongoing biological suppression. They argue that seeing undeniable physical proof of our colossal, magical past would act as a psychological and resonant trigger for us today. It would unlock humanity's suppressed DNA memory, that massive 97% of our genome that modern science arrogantly brushes off as junk DNA. The system is absolutely terrified that waking up to the truth will reboot our dormant human 1.0 operating system. Which leaves us with a truly profound mystery to consider as we wrap up this explainer. The bones of the giants might be locked away in hidden vaults somewhere, systematically erased from the official record to keep us feeling small, weak, and completely alone. But the code that built them, that code might still be right inside us. So I'll leave you with this. If the bones are gone, what else is waiting to be awakened in your DNA? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the scientific indictment. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative,